More about Hugh Carey's life and his political career is a man who literally wrote the book on the former governor. Seymour Lachman is the co-author of The Man Who Saved New York, Hugh Carey and the Great Fiscal Crisis of 1975. Mr. Lachman's joining us from Hofstra University on Long Island. It is great to see you, sir. Thanks for being with us.
It's a great pleasure to be on your program again.
So the picture that is emerging now that Hugh Carey has passed away is of an enigmatic guy. He was at once very accomplished, celebrated for saving New York, as you have written, but also sometimes aloof and disengaged. Do you think that that is fair?
I don't think it is fair. I think he was a man who took on major challenges and major problems and was able to resolve them. Problems and issues that others were afraid to touch because they thought it would blow up in his face. I mean, many of these occurred during his first administration. A few of them occurred during the second administration, where he had a chance to breathe and do other things. But this man was handed a plate which he never knew existed in terms of New York going into bankruptcy. And it wasn't a possibility, it was a probability that the city would and the state would follow. And the Carey administration, and I agreed with them, thought this would have national implications, and I agree with them in terms of that.
Do you think it's also been said that he was incredible in responding to big challenges, large-scale stuff that you are
Yes.
talking about now? But when it came to day-to-day things, maybe he was not as interested. Do you think that that is true?
Well, he was outstanding. He was one of our greatest governors in the 20th and 21st century. But taking something very briefly, as you know, I'm a past president of the New York City Board of Education.
Yes.
If it weren't for Hugh Carey in the House of Representatives, there would probably not be an Elementary and Secondary Education Act. From 1865 to 1965, people were divided along religious lines. Carey proposed a compromise. At first, LBJ, President Johnson, opposed it, and then he went along with Governor Carey, then Congressman Carey. So even before going into his position as governor and rescuing New York from the brink of bankruptcy, he had a wonderful record which very few people knew about. And he always worked with Republicans and Democrats, with labor union people and Wall Street and business people. He was able to bring them together, which is not the usual for state or national government today.
He is enjoying a little bit of a renaissance, and obviously until he passed away this weekend, because in part of your book, because Governor Cuomo had sent that book actually to labor leaders when he wanted them to come to the table to make concessions to save the state again, as he said. Why do you
Governor
think
Cuomo was fantastic as a public relations person for our book, and I thank him immensely.
I hope you're sending him royalties, Mr. Lachman. I'm just saying.
Well, first we have to get our royalties, which we haven't received yet. Then he'll get royalties afterwards.
But in terms of Governor Carey, as you mentioned, there are so many things that people don't know about him. And Assemblyman McEnany was quoted in the Times-Union, and I think that this is probably sums it up quite nicely, that there are many people who were saved by Governor Carey who didn't even know about it. I mean, not only the education piece that you're talking about in Congress, the saving of the city of New York, but Willowbrook, but women, all sorts of things, right? Women have to thank him for Medicaid coverage for abortions, I believe, that he fought for.
Absolutely.
He vetoed the death penalty repeatedly. But why is it that people don't know about him? He's like the Rodney Dangerfield of governors in the modern era until recently.
That's a very good question. In fact, when I asked for the archives from the New York State Director of Archives, he said, thank goodness, finally, someone is going to do something on Hugh Carey. Several, organizations and people have asked for the archives of Nelson Rockefeller. I don't know why. I think because he led a quiet life after he left office. And he was involved with family and personal matters, and he didn't get due justice in the media as one of the state's greatest governors.
Well, what was overshadowed was his personal life, his second marriage, and sort of the highly public nature of that, and the subsequent divorce. I mean, maybe, and some of the things that he did towards the end of his tenure in the second term overshadowed some of his accomplishments, and which now, when you think about all the scandals that we've seen that far surpass anything that Hugh Carey might have done, you got to wonder why that was.
Well, I think it was somewhat unfair. Remember, Hugh Carey was widowed. He was very, very close to his life partner, his wife Helen, and she was the one that said, okay, when he decided to run for governor before she died from cancer. She said, if you win, well, the family will be together in the executive mansion. If you lose, the family will be together in another home where you won't be commuting back and forth between Washington and New York. But I also think, look, Hugh Carey was a widower. He was a very lonely man, and during his first administration, he had these major problems that kept him busy day and night. These were challenges that were unbelievable, and he selected the best and brightest of people throughout the country, regardless of party affiliation. He owed nothing to the bosses, and it's, in a sense, it was a way of slowly overcoming his grief. Now, the problems in the second administration were very minor. He was a widower, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. It was similar to Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman splitting up, and then Nancy, etc. Except he never, ever, that's right. He had, not only that, but his first wife was always, in the last 25 years, uppermost and foremost in his thought.
You know, what's also interesting is the timing of his death, coming at a time when the country is so divided, when the S&P has downgraded the country's credit rating for the first time in history, at a time when we are in this amazing financial downward spiral, hopefully to be checked at some point. It comes at a moment that maybe the country really needed to learn a lesson from Hugh Carey. Do you think that that's possible?
Absolutely. Whether it's the man who saved New York, Hugh Carey, the great fiscal crisis of 1975, or another book that will shortly come out from a columnist in one of New York City's papers. More has to be learned about this man, because the way he resolved these problems, the way he took on the problems, the way he took the Harry Truman "buck stops here" sign and put it on his desk, the way he treated his staff people, and in terms of giving them all the leeway and flexibility they needed to accomplish their goals, is really unique in terms of politicians, and certainly politicians today. And bringing people together, that was, it's amazing whom he brought together. The most diverse and different groups, politically, ethnically, religiously, racially. He was an amazing man.
And people were very angry at him for some of the decisions that he made. I mean, making hard decisions as a leader is a tough thing to do.
I agree. I mean, the whole issue of the death penalty, which could have cost him his re-election. But he had said to me some years ago that he will never forget his experience in liberating Mauthausen concentration camps. And he saw what could happen if individuals had the feeling that they had the right to kill other people for whatever reason. In fact, I remember, since I was in this congressional district and worked for him as a volunteer for him as a graduate student, on 13th Avenue in Brooklyn, a man ran out of a stall and they heard he was campaigning. And he wasn't supposed to win, and only 6% of the people in New York knew who he was in the Democratic primary. And the man hugged him and kissed him and began crying. And he said, "You rescued me from the Mauthausen concentration camp." And he was, a lieutenant colonel at the end of the war. He entered as a private. No West Point experience, anything like that, and he rose to the top. And
Well,
he made some very rough, tough decisions then also.
Well, Mr. Lachman, I want to thank you for remembering Hugh Carey. There are not many stories like his, increasingly few and far between, and we are remembering him this evening. You, of course, are one of the authors of The Man Who Saved New York, and I want to thank you very much for sharing some time with us this evening. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me on the program.